So today we are going to be exploring Meet Me Mahogany Open Call Opera. We've become quite well known for sort of our approach to recruitment, and we thought this was something that would be very interesting to interrogate. So I am going to hand you over to our fabulous host for this evening, Toria, who's going to introduce today's discussion. Take it away.
Hi, everybody. My name's Toria. I can see lots of people that I know in the room and lots of people that I don't. So, hello. And I am a middle-aged white woman with blonde bobbed hair, wearing a big sky blue jumper and sat against a white wall. Um, uh, and oh gosh, you can tell I'm really nervous, but I'll calm down in a minute. Um, I'm a writer mainly for opera, and I'm a director, and I'm more recently a producer, having formed a feminist opera company called Hera, which I now co-lead with the singer Linda Hurst. And I have worked in two very different ways with Mahogany Opera, which is, I think, why they've come to me to start off the discussion this evening. Which is that when we were a very new company, we applied for what they call various stages, which was an open call for opera makers, for composer, writer teams, and other kind of making teams. To receive kind of development support. And that was I can remember coming in for an interview because it was election day 2019, and it all felt very fraught and dramatic. It only got more fraught and dramatic because we didn't do our sharing because it was an application to share work in a festival in March 2020. But nevertheless, our application to work with the wonderful composer Amble Scoos on a verbatim opera about the Department of Work and Pensions um, made it through the open call, and we had kind of three fabulous workshop days, semi-remote, with Amble on Zoom, having seen the way that the wind was blowing, and me and Freddie in a room in Crystal Palace Library, and it was very unglamorous, but what it did do was get our work going and give us real confidence in the project, without which I don't think it would have gone forward as an all digital project, which we completed the following year. So that was uh, pivotal for us at a really, really early stage of a project and a pretty early stage as a company. It also was the start of an artistic relationship and conversation, which led to co-production, so a very different way of working together. Last year, when we made a show called Out of Her Mouth, as a co-production between Hera and Mahogany and Dunedin Consort, which was a staging of Baroque cantatas by the composer Elizabeth Jacquet de la Guerre, for which we ran an open call for the director and for one of the singers and for a musician, and Mathilde and Katarzyna, who are here with us this evening, became the director and the harpsichordist for that show through that process. So we'll kind of come back to that and to them later. But first of all, I want to have a quick chat with Freddie about some of the kind of key themes and issues around the idea of open call that seem kind of useful to pick up on through the evening, and which we'd like everybody's thoughts about, really. And the first of those is the question of what Mahogany get out of it as a company. Why this process, which uses up quite a lot of time and a bit of money and a lot of effort, is a good thing from the company's point of view.
That's a question to me, is it, Victoria?
Yeah, that's a question to you, Freddie. Sorry.
No, don't worry. Hi, everybody. Good evening. It's great to see you all here. Thanks very much for joining us. It's also great to see lots of friendly faces, some I know and some I don't know. My name's Freddie. I'm the artistic director of Mahogany Opera. I'm a white man in his early 40s. I've got strawberry blonde hair and blue eyes, and I'm wearing a brown jumper. And I've got all my books behind me to give me some confidence and some perceived intelligence for the conversation. And yeah, I'm really excited about talking about open calls because, as Mark says, it's something that we've done more and more of, and got a little bit addicted to in a way. And there are a number of reasons why I think we do open calls. One of which is simply about wanting to extend our horizons. We want to discover new people, new ideas, new things. This is very much in the spirit of Mahogany. And although, of course, I also hugely value working and repeat working with people and building ongoing relationships with people, but at the same time, we also want to continually renew and extend ourselves in that sense. I think of Mahogany as a meeting place, and I get really excited about bringing people together and meeting and seeing what happens when they meet, what creative sparks take place, what happens when you bring different constellations together. And I think the open call process, our open call process, certainly feeds into all of that. I think another reason why we do it is because it's an amazing way of finding out not only who's out there, but also what people are up to and what people are thinking, and getting a sense of the zeitgeist, and seeing what trends are developing or what have you. And then I think something that we'll talk more about later is also when we have a philosophy of working generally that is about taking real care, being compassionate, being transparent about the way in which we bring people together and the way in which we make work. And so it makes sense for me not only to do that when we're all together in the rehearsal room, but also the process leading up to that. In terms of the way in which we engage people, the way in which we bring people into the process also needs to have the same kind of intentionality and the same kind of care to it. And of course, what we do at the moment is never perfect. We're always still trying to hone what we do, and every process is different and individual. But I think, I think this would be something I'd like to interrogate further with all of you, is how a process of an open call, how does that feed into the process further down the line? And then the only other thing I'd want to say is that something that in some ways isn't about how does it benefit Mahogany, but it's more just about my observations across the industry are that a lot of the ways in which people are selected and engaged is not very fair, and it's not very caring. So I think there's just a desire to kind of to write that and to do something different, to show that it doesn't have to be like that. It can be different, and there are ways of making it fairer for everyone, and consequently then hopefully more open, more transparent, and more diverse. So that's a sort of overarching splurge for you, Toria. And maybe we can hop on various bits.
For everybody, I mean, that all sounds wonderful and very thoughtful. So I'm immediately going to challenge you a little bit with something that feels like it might come up during the evening, and which I know that we've both thought about in this process, which is when you put out an open call, the level of response is enormous. I think when we did the open call for Out of Her Mouth, we had over 100 singers apply for one role. We had over 80 directors apply for a directing job. And I suppose my the question is what do you feel like or our responsibilities are with all of those people, most of whom won't go from that process into, certainly not immediately, into working with you as a company, where by putting the invitation out there, that all of those people have spent a certain amount of time putting in an application, and how do we deal with that kind of sheer volume that is involved when you go about recruitment in this way?
Yeah, definitely. And it's difficult. And I found with all of our open calls going through the long lists that there are more than one moment when you think, my God, there are so many people. And where are all the opportunities for all these incredibly talented and wonderful people? And you see the imbalance between the talent and the passion and the enthusiasm that's out there and the opportunities. One thing that we're always quite one thing we always talk about is how specific do we want the call to be? And my instinct is always to keep it as open as possible. And of course, that then encourages probably more people to apply. And it might mean, therefore, that we have people who don't necessarily fit into what we're looking for. But I suppose I'm keen for the open call also to have an element of, well, we don't know what we're looking for. That's also the point about it. And so it's up to you to tell us what you want to do or who you are or what it is, rather than it being too. Sometimes I see call outs from other organizations that feel like they're being too specific about what type of person or whatever it is that they're looking for. And my response as an artist is slightly put off by that, because I don't want to be thought about being channeled in that way. I want to be given the respect and the trust to come forward and say who I am and what I want to do. So that's something that we want to offer people is that genuine openness for tell us who you are and tell us what you want to do.
Thanks. I think that's a really interesting balance between openness and an awareness of, to put it bluntly, not wanting to waste people's time. And I know we talked about different ways of structuring and wording an open call, which make it open and which also ask for a limited amount of work at the other end in terms of saying hi and showing us who you are, so that that kind of burden of time is equally, is kind of fairly distributed. And I'd be really interested to hear from other people about how we did with that and how their experiences with other processes have been with that.
Well, that's something we did with, and I think I can see Matilda wants to speak, but with the director's process, we were very clear and keen not to ask the directors to present a concept in there. And that, okay, this wasn't in the open call stage, this was in the interview stage, but we were really keen not to ask the directors have to do that kind of work in advance of an interview. But Matilda, perhaps you have something to add to that.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that as a director, this is so rare when you ask ever to pitch. Most of the time you are going to apply for being an artistic director, which is somehow another job, or really often a manager of a building, or more and more that. And the rest of the time, the rest of my time, I invent projects and I make myself pitch for project and invent them all in my head for no one at all. So I welcome the exercise and I welcome the outside demand, because I think as a freelance director or as a artistic director of a small company, I generate the demand and I make the thing happen. Nobody's asking me anything. But as a director, it's quite welcoming to being asked something as an artist, not as a manager, which is often what we fall into, particularly, I guess, in the understanding of directing in Britain. You are kind of a manager more than anything else, and you have to constantly battle to be heard. So I really enjoyed the exercise. I didn't feel it was a burden. I feel like if I could do that more, it probably would be good as in the same way that singers and performers can audition. I wouldn't mind the auditioning system as an exercise.
This is a question I have for everyone here as well, actually, in terms of, because when I've applied for something and not got it, I've still found that process an incredibly useful one. A one in terms of where you're asked to reflect on yourself, on your career, on where you're at, and often by not getting something, you realize, of course, I didn't get that because that's not who I am. That's not what I'm supposed to have, or whatever it is. You learn something about yourself by doing that. So I'd be interested to know if that's shared by other people, or that's just me living in my kind of overly positive lifestyle.
I think that's a really interesting general question, is what does a good recruitment process for a job that you don't get look like? Because obviously we tend to think of a recruitment process for a job that we do get as a good process. At least if it's not, then doesn't go on to be a horrible experience. But part of our responsibility, if we're producing a project, is to think about what that process, particularly as you talked about the effort to work from a place of kindness. Once you get to the making process, it feels like that shouldn't just be like a charmed circle for the artists that do get selected, but a kind of general relationship with the world. But it's perhaps a hard thing to achieve. It's not easy to be an arts freelancer. It's not easy to go up for stuff and not get it. So again, interesting to see what other people say about that. Along the same lines, I wanted to bring up what you think the connection is between an open call as a kind of technical thing, putting a call out there that people can apply to, and having a more accessible and inclusive recruitment process, which in turn, the accessibility and the inclusivity leads to a kind of more diverse set of artists. And what exactly you think that link is? I think there is a link. I'm very aware that this process is how we connected, coming to you as a disabled artist with a all disabled led project, that it was kind of hard to get initial support for, early stage project support for, and so I know that helped us, and I know that in terms of wording call outs, both working on Out of Her Mouth and other projects that we've done since, I feel like I'm constantly learning about how to frame a call out in a way that avoids creating barriers. Yeah, tell me a little bit about what the link has been between those two things of being accessible and diverse and running open calls.
The thing that struck me just while you were talking there is remembering that open call that we did, that you applied for, we got, as ever, lots of people, but we got a lot of applications from disabled artists, and it was not something that we felt particularly experienced in, actually. And so it kind of threw up a big question for us in terms of like, oh gosh, how do we now support these artists? How do we process or how do we take the process forward in a way? And it led us to doing some training with Drake, and working with you, Toria, working with, we worked at least with one other disabled artist in that group as well. So for me, it was about a learning. It wasn't about kind of, oh, we're going to do this open call because it's then going to lead to this kind of accessibility or what have you. It was sort of, it was genuinely open from our point of view as well, in terms of what we then discovered and what we've subsequently learned about. And so yeah, this is what I mean, I think, about the openness in terms of really learning about stuff. I think with every open call, it's thrown up something that we're excited by and interested by, but that we don't know about, or that we don't know enough about. And it's really helped us then to learn. I'm not sure if that really, does that answer your question?
I think sort of. I don't know that there is a straightforward answer, and it would be interesting. I think it's really important we hear about that connection, or what the possible connections are between those things from other people too.
Bridget's put her hand up, which means I've forgotten to say something.
I just wanted to chip in on that question about, because I think you're right, Freddie. It's not like we've ever set off with most of our open calls to say we want a specific type of person or whatever, but I think we do think really carefully about the language of the call to make it clear that we do endeavour to be as inclusive as possible, as accessible as possible, that we will budget for access provision for artists, both in the recruitment process, if needed for interviews or auditions, but also like if they are selected as an artist to work with us. So I think my impression from sort of talking to people is that is picked up on, and so therefore I would be not surprised if that, there's a link there. It's not a scientific one. There's a link there between, getting a more diverse range of applicants by really carefully considering the language and the calls. And I think we've looked at it every time to kind of improve it. There's been a couple of nice comments in the chat as well. I just want to sort of feed in with someone who's asked about how we extend reach, which I think is a really interesting question. Every time we do a call, we always do try to kind of like reach it out to new networks and through new people. But there's also this very great question of how you know who you're not reaching. We do ask people who respond to our open calls to fill in diversity monitoring survey, and I spent some time not that long ago comparing those stats with the stats of the artists that we engage, which was quite interesting because in some cases we were kind of actually engaging a more diverse group of people than had applied for open call, and on other measures not so much. So that's something for us to really look at and unpick and see where we're not reaching people. So yeah, and there's some interesting feedback from people about feedback if you don't get a job as well. So someone who says it can be a bit soul crushing, which I think is I'm sure very true, however carefully it's expressed. But then someone else saying caring companies still can remember your skills and promote you to other sister companies, which I think is a really good point. It's something that we very much do try to do, and I do personally recommend people who I've seen to other colleagues in the sector. So sorry, I'll stop talking now.
No, not at all. All of that is great. And yeah, I would say as well with working with Hera that part of it is it's weird because I have access needs as a disabled artist, but it's only through considering how that's expressed to other people who might apply for a thing that that's actually made me more honest with myself about what I find off-putting or difficult to deal with in making an application. And so it's helped kind of connect up my personal kind of experience of being on one side of a call out process to kind of hopefully putting kind of things in place that, whether that's just putting your commitment to being accessible at the top of a call out and not burying it at the bottom and not putting it in kind of language that sounds copy and pasted, and making sure that it includes that that some of these things might cost money and that's okay. Just before we get to, because I think we should talk to some of the artists that we have here, but one final thing to bring up with Freddie before we do is the question of if you like the second part of the funnel is if you're really open in the first stage of recruitment, and then you get down to a short list of people to meet or to interview or to audition, what do you then do differently at that stage? How is there a sense in which that can be more open than a standard audition process in terms of what people do with you once they're in the door?
I don't think of that stage as being open as such, but it's about being it's about creating an environment where the people, the applicants can show themselves who they really are and give their best, whatever that means. So if you're a singer, that might mean something different if you're a director or what have you. But I think it's about trying to create an environment where people can give of their best, and can feel comfortable and welcomed. And I think, a lot of experiences of singers in other environments are that, like I think you mentioned, Tori, you walk in, you stand on the spot, you sing your aria, and you walk out again, and that's it. Or as Mathilde says, like as a director, you like what happens? You don't even get that chance to to do that. It just depends on who you know or whether someone has happened to see your show, and how do you get that first show, and how do you get that, whatever it is. So I think for me it's about creating that kind of caring environment, that's key. I just want to pick up on Keelan's point about feedback, which I think is really good, and I think it's something that we could improve on as well, about terms of giving feedback. And I'm not sure, to be totally honest, I'm not sure if I'm scared to give feedback that's potentially negative. To be totally honest, it's about capacity. Actually, it's simply about the fact that in order to give some really careful and thoughtful feedback to so many people, would just take a very long time. And after you've done the process of the sort of emotional process of going through all of the applications and living with everyone and imagining what it would be like with that person to doing that job, what have you, I find I'm a bit sort of wrung out by that point, to be totally honest. But but that's me saying that I would like to improve on that and work out a way of doing it. But I think it's also good if you don't know the person already. Do you know what I mean? That there's all that. Yeah, I'm not going to make any more excuses. But thank you for making that point. I think it's a really good point.
When you said that, Freddie, I just thought, wouldn't that be a great job though for an intern or someone? Because I've learned a lot by sitting on panels and giving feedback, and because you realize how bad you must have been before, or what the thing that that really don't read at all. Or the level of complication that is not welcome, or all of that. And it's only when you sit on a panel that you understand those things. So I'm just thinking, as a young director, I would have really enjoyed and learned much quicker how to present myself if I had the chance to see like 100 directors talking about projects. I don't know. I mean, it's a and then it's a good. And then I guess the exchange of experience would be to write the feedback, or at least to try to write what's being said. I don't know. I just.
Thank you. Yeah, it's an interesting idea.
So just a little bit aware of time ticking away. So what I'm going to ask Freddie to do next is to say a little bit about Mahogany's latest project, about Sky in a Small Cage, which I'm sure a lot of people in the room saw, but maybe not everybody, and to introduce the two singers that we have from that project with us so that we can hear from them.
Yeah, Sky in a Small Cage, it was and still is an opera by Rolf Hind, with text by Dante Michaud, and also including text by the Sufi poet Rumi. And we performed it in Copenhagen and at the Barbican this summer. And the cast, we had 4 principal singers, and then we had an ensemble group of singers, of 6 singers, and we did an open call for those 6 roles. And we had lots of extraordinary and wonderful people applying to that. And the audition process that we did there was, we actually invited groups of 6 people, and did a kind of working session with those 6 people. So there was a chance not only to see people individually, but also to see how they interact and how they work as a group, because that ensemble was going to be such an ensemble. And from that, we got 6 wonderful people, 2 of whom are here today. So can I introduce Rylan and Tai, who can perhaps share some of their experiences of both the project and the process. Mylan, do you want to go first?
Hi. Lovely to meet all of you who I don't know. Hello to the people that I do know. I haven't seen some of you in a while. Yes, I was singing the tenor role in Sky in a Small Cage. And it's really interesting to hear that Mahogany Opera's approach seems to be so different from a variety of other companies, because this was the first opera that I had applied for. It was the first open call that I'd ever done as a singer. I'm more from a composition background, but I do sort of metal and like heavy rock vocals and a variety of sort of chamber music, and kind of felt that I was at the point where I could take on a new sort of challenge. And so, yeah, it's really funny to me to hear that, you might kind of walk in, have a very still audition process, and it's all quite restricted. Because I think I came in and we all sat around a sort of campfire and pretended we were singing songs to each other, and we're sort of running around the room, already mostly off copy. So yeah, that audition process for me was really fun. It almost felt a bit like a game. There was a sense of interaction with the people already, and I was very fortunate that the second alto from my group also ended up being in the ensemble, and we'd gotten on really well. So yeah, for me, it felt quite wholesome. It felt like quite a holistic process. I don't know, Ty, if yours was similar. I know we were in different audition groups, but would you like to elaborate?
Yeah, it was. Thanks, Rylan. And as well, good to see all of you. Hi from Chicago. Yeah, the in-person audition was a lovely kind of change from the singer standing alone. Deliver, thanks, we'll call you, don't call us. The part of the process I found sort of most, I guess both what drew me to the project and what has in hindsight been the most affirming about it was the open call sort of online portion of it. Getting in the room as a singer, you participate in so many workshops and early trials of operas that for roles you don't get, but you're just there. Like that environment is very familiar. But the sense of a kind of platformed open call in which you, as an artist, are given a chance to interface with the ethics of the company and the production. That's rare, right? Usually you're tailoring for your best guess at what the company's after. And so the transparency up front about like ethical standing as regards inclusion and sort of project content, modes of collaboration, allows you to not feel as though you are tailoring a version of yourself for an invisible other, but presenting, especially for those of us who, for those in communities who have grown up kind of code switching or attempting to fit a bill, to be able to sort of let guard down and offer yourself as you are, knowing that the production cares about that first. That was really special, especially coming from out of the country where financial resources for me just to bring me over for a production like this would have been ridiculous, as just like a singer in a box. So yeah, I assume, Freddie, Bridget, that was sort of part of the intention, right? Is offering the same vulnerability up front you're hoping to get from your constituents.
I'm glad we're recording this because, yeah, what he said. No, thank you. It's very beautiful what both of you say. Does anyone want to respond to that from anyone else's own experiences of other projects?
I guess if you don't mind me throwing a question back to the room, sort of more specific. The thing that I continue to, it's very in the air here in the States right now, right? The question of ethics and identity and equity. Ideally, when you invite an open call, you are able to kind of pick through and decide like people who are tailor fit for the kind of work we want to do. but that is also its own form of exclusion, right? It's its own form of drawing harder boundaries for what we're after. And I've been on productions where the team has been handpicked, and then there's been a person who hasn't, or two people who haven't sort of felt that same vibe, and then they get excluded, which is just as which lacks the same equity as the other side. So I guess where are we in the kind of the fragile contingency between an ethical, open source, equal access space and still having to make decisions at the end of yes and no?
I think that's quite. I'm gonna name that as a sort of moderately profound silence after that question, rather than just a just a gap. Because I certainly don't have a straightforward answer. I do think there is a situation both in the UK, and I can imagine that it feels very strong as an imperative in the States at the moment, that it that we need to be explicit about our values. There is a tendency to think that sort of diversity chat has been normalized in the UK arts, and therefore that it's the norm, and therefore potentially even that it's a little bit cringe or embarrassing, or all of that diversity stuff. And yet the lived experience of minority groups in life and within the arts suggests otherwise. And I certainly value, and therefore hope to replicate for other people, kind of an explicit commitment that goes beyond that sort of policy consensus that, after all, is likely to be challenged politically in the coming years. I think probably in the UK as well as in the States. And that therefore the idea that we do things in an equitable way because that's where we've got to now is not a thing that we can rely on. So we need to do it for other reasons. And so there are explicit commitments that go with that. I'm certainly also aware that as a self-described feminist company, as a self-described intersectional feminist company, that's a thing that we want to say because it's a thing that we have to live up to. Because there are, for example, trans exclusive so-called feminists in the UK who would quite happily align themselves with us if we don't make explicit what our views are. And it's important then to have those views, but then there is a kind of strange atmosphere around funding and the arts and charitable status that supposedly you're meant to be sort of neutral on issues, but I mean ultimately you can't be neutral on these things. They're pressing. So that's my personal response, which I feel like you were owed a response, but I'm sure other people have had a bit of thinking time now.
No, thanks for that, Toria. And I guess, Ryland, to put you on the spot a little bit, a positive example of this this inclusive sort of call model is sort of Ryland's background outside of sort of the classical voice, right? Sky in a Small Cage was still a project that required a barrier to entry. Like you had to be able to sing quarter tones in 15/16 at quarter equals 168. Like there were kind of technical thresholds that you had to pass, as well as ethical sort of modes of engagement. Ryland, in a sort of standard opera call, wouldn't have been the obvious choice, despite having been, I would argue, the key member to the production over the course of our working process, the key energy sort of in the room. But because as a composer, that's not the thing that you expect to see. It's like, yeah, you're a composer, but we wouldn't ask you for this. But thinking about equity of access can also look like equity of intellectual backgrounds, equity of trainings, that Rylan is a singer with these abilities, but not trained as a classical singer for the opera stage. And that can still find a place in a production willing to engage on multiple levels like that.
Thank you for that, Ty. I wondered if this was going to come up, just because I know also, whilst you are a fantastic singer, you are also a composer and a writer. And I think, were within the ensemble two of the people who did have those sort of additional jobs, rather than being like singers. And I was definitely very worried about being the only the only not singer, sorry. And I think because of that, really over-prepared for the shows, which stood me in good stead. But as you say, Ty, it was a very technically demanding opera. There was a lot of vocal agility that was required, that just required that sheer amount of practice, and I think flexibility in the room, particularly when we were combining that with Freddie's staging. When I saw the call posted, I actually messaged Rolf, who's the composer, who I briefly met when I was studying undergrad level. I said, "Hi, Rolf. It's been 5 or 6 years. I've seen this call, and I really wanted to know, do you think that the roles are for sort of contemporary classical singers? Obviously I've done a bit of singing, but I'm kind of more from this background. What was your vision for it?" And he was like, just kind of whatever, really. I haven't thought about it. Just kind of, and I was like, oh, okay. And I think the kind of looseness of that, the lack of like prescriptiveness for it, was a weird sort of encouragement to go ahead. And so I submitted a tape of me singing a Scott Walker song, I think from The Drift. It was like quite avant-garde, it was quite experimental. And that combined with my cover letter sort of outlining, I'm not from this background, I'm from this sort of background, and I have a very specific sound. And it might not be the specific sound that you're looking for, but if it is, I am open for this kind of new challenge. And Ty, as you were saying, I think it equips you with different skills in the room. And I think also it's given me the confidence for, if I do see a different open call, either with Mahogany Opera or a different company that is that little bit more avant-garde, that bit more forward thinking, I think I now have like the basis of, I could go and do that. That is something that I am capable of going to do. So yeah, it's quite confidence building in a way.
And we were also lucky to work with a director willing to tailor roles and movement to the bodies in the room, as opposed to the sort of bodies in the head, right?
Oh, 100%.
And that privilege is very lucky. Like, you don't get that in every rehearsal process. Freddie, how do you go about like adapting production ideas once you get the real people in front of you? Like, what changes when you're like, oh, these are the 6 now that I have in front of me?
I suppose the ideas in the head are more conceptual rather than specific, so that there isn't that tension. I don't have that experience of like, oh God, I was thinking this and now I've got to change it because I've got these bodies in the room. It's more about frameworks. It's about coming with frameworks, which not only then help me to articulate what I want to express, but it also creates a framework for the performers in the space as well, and gives them a support in order to be creative. Because ultimately, like I was saying with the open call in the rehearsal room, I want everyone in the room to be doing their best and to be giving their best and to be expressing themselves, who they are. And I think that, and it's beautiful what you just said, Rylan, and I think it relates to this question, Barry Paul H, about what I would consider a good pitch when you're looking for a composer. I would say really be yourself and express yourself, and if it's the right fit, or if you show yourself to be the right person or a good person for that role, then that's great. And if it's not right, then it's not right. It wasn't supposed to be anyway. Don't try and second guess and sort of like you said, Ty, like what how did you express it? Sort of what part of myself should I present for this thing? don't try and present a part of yourself, present your whole self, who you are. And I think when you're on the panel, you see that very clearly. And I think it's, this is a question I always have. One of the main questions when I'm looking at applications is, what's this person's voice? What do they want to say? And are they really able to say it? So yeah.
Yeah, and if I can just jump off that for a quick one, and then I can pass it back off. Is that okay, Toria? Sorry about that.
I was about to do the boring thing of saying, would you a sort of tea break? So that's all you're bouncing back to. So say your thing, and then we'll have a tea break.
Yeah, I'm just a quick on the composer side of things. I tour with a quartet here in the States that gets a lot of like sort of out of the blue email requests from composers who say, hey, I would love to write for you, interested in writing for you. And the emails that are always strange to us are the ones that say, well, what are you looking for? Do you want an atonal piece? Do you want a tonal piece? Do you want a short piece? Do you want a long piece? Do you want something fun? Do you want something that's dark? We don't know. And if you are so kind of malleable to anything, what is the kind of core identity that you're presenting to us? Is it anything sort of that we can stand on? Because if you're just trying to tailor it for the job, for the money, that doesn't feel good as artists to be working with you, because we know the motives are so transparent. But if it's just like when somebody shows up in the email and says, hey, I really want to write this piece. I want to write an hour piece with masks and robes and like all memorized. We're like, yeah, what the hell? Go for it. You know, so that authentic sort of initial presentation is really like part and parcel with how we are willing to engage with the material at all. Thanks, Toria, for the time. I appreciate it.
Okay.
the title is brilliant. It sounds like it's like political and sexual. It's scandalous in itself. What's really fascinating about Elisabeth Jacquet-Laguerre is the words, well, we've translated, but I mean the approach and the complexity of what she's talking about. Because she's talking about patriarchy and misogyny at her time, which is so close to ours, weirdly, worryingly. But in the same level of complexity and details, it's not judgmental, and it is militant, but it's not militant. It's not violent. It's compassionate and angry at the same time, and I find really refreshing to have a complex discourse around misogyny and the difficulty of patriarchy.
What's quite rare, even for the women composers that we do know about, is that she had this kind of long, sustained professional career where she was able to develop kind of a mature style and start to kind of innovate and become like really confident in her craft. So the pieces that we're doing, she wrote when she was in her 40s, living in Paris. You can really tell that she knows what she's doing and that she's taking risks.
I've done quite a lot of French Baroque music, but I don't think I've sung any by Jacquet-Laguerre before.
The sweetest of victories is all I pursue.
Basically, in Judith, we have a narrator, we have Judith and Holofernes, and you kind of hear all three voices. So Judith's story is that her city is under siege. She basically seduces Holofernes and kills him.
The way that Toria has done the translation, it sort of switches persona, it switches time, present tense to past tense. So it's a little bit like a kind of story, like a filmic storyboard. It's not very common to have such direct storytelling. And I think in this case, audiences will really be able to sit back and listen and hear a story. Suzanne is the victim of a pair of voyeurs who are trying to pressure her into something she's not comfortable with. The cantata is the story of her attempt to vindicate herself and to seek justice for this kind of intrusion.
If you could see how aging bodies are breathing without lungs.
I was drawn by the fact that it was a female Baroque composer and that it was a new translation written by a woman and that it was all about women. I thought that was fascinating.
That it's only right, as Leia is the eldest, that she become a woman first.
The character of Rachel is the youngest daughter of a wealthy farmer, Laban. She's betrothed to Jacob, but unknown to her, her father substitutes her older sister, and so she marries Jacob instead. And so Rachel, not being as feisty and fiery as some of the other women in this series, just sits and waits patiently until it's her turn.
Audiences can expect a lot of watermelon-based action during this piece, and I won't say much more than that, but prepare yourselves.
Laban stands his ground, says he's a careful father, but he knows what's best for both his little girls.
Hello, everybody. Welcome back. I hope you had whatever you needed in your break. And I've got tea, which is marvelous. And for those of you who saw it, I hope you enjoyed the video highlights of both. It was very nice for me at the end there to see a little bit of our project from last year out of her mouth. So in a second, I'm going to hand over a little bit to Matilda and Katarzyna, who were involved in that project. Gosh, involved is an understatement. That was the wrong word. Who were very who were very central to that project. So just to introduce that a little bit, and some of you will have just seen what we did in co-production with Mahogany and Dunedin Consort, which in itself was an extraordinary thing for us as a kind of small company. This was a project that was really dear to me, that I'm going to say retrospectively I pitched to Freddie, although I'm not really very good at anything as orderly as that. And I would say described excitedly is what happened. I got excited about a thing, and then retrospectively I realised that I'd pitched it to him. And Mahogany facilitated, I think, to be fair, the connection with Dunedin. They had a relationship with both of our companies and were able to kind of bring that together. And I think it was, as a co-production structure, quite unusual. And that, for me, connects with the openness of the recruitment process and the kind of openness that hopefully kind of fed through the project. Because I already felt like something quite serendipitous had happened in it coming into being. So we staged 3 solo pieces by a Baroque composer called Elizabeth Jacquet de Laguerre, which are extraordinary storytelling monologues about women in the Old Testament. And what I really, really wanted to do was to illuminate how extraordinary they were by performing them in English. So while I went about making a performance translation, we held an open call for a director and for one of the players. We didn't know it was going to be a harpsichordist. Was a harpsichordist, but that wasn't part of the process. It could have ended up being any member of the Continuo group, and the rest of the Continuo group would have been formed around that person by Dunedin Consort. And then also for the singer to play Rachel. And to some extent, that meant that each of the 3 co-producing companies took a bit of kind of pastoral and professional responsibility for one of the people recruited through the open call. So Linda and I developed a relationship with kind of Alice, and that included some kind of professional development support. And there were, perhaps we'll hear a little bit about, there was some kind of there was a relationship for Katarzyna with Dunedin and for Matilda and Mahogany. Yeah, I'm going to stop talking, but that's what we did. We put it out into the world, and lots of people applied to come and be a part of the project, which was enormously exciting and validating for me, as it had started off as a little mad idea in my brain. So then it got to be a mad idea in Matilda's brain. So maybe she can tell us a little bit more about the process of how that went.
Hello, Mathilde. I've just realized that I spoke before without describing my appearance. So I am nearly 50 years old, which is outrageous in itself. I'm a nearly 50 years old woman of beige skin. That's the best I can do. I've got loads of black hair and a sort of, that I've tied in a sort of pompadour, which makes me look like Elvis, which I imagine is something that might happen when you reach 50 years old. I'll let you know how that progresses. So the mad idea. So I guess I have to say that I was very excited by the idea of, and I'm going to use the word devising, although it doesn't mean that we've touched the text at all, because Toria had done a great job in translation. But the idea of putting together 3 pieces that have not been put together. So in a way, in devising a show, and devising an opera. So when do you ever had that level of luxury of you are devising an opera? So it's easier than inventing it, but it's also sort of complicated assembling so that everything becomes meaningful to all the other parts. So that was quite exciting. So it's a little bit like writing on your feet without doing the writing. So I like that. That excited me. And also, I love Baroque music, and I'm quite ignorant in terms of the repertoire because I didn't grow up at all in the classical music world. I grew up on Gil Scott-Heron and Gilberto Gil, so it's a completely other world. But I did fall in love many times of Baroque music, and I'm quite interested in the sound and the kind of, I was about to say God, my musical term are completely wrong, but the slippery silk aspect of it. Did that mean anything to anyone? I'm sure there are some extremely precise musical term for what I've just said. I didn't know Jacques Laguerre at all, so, unsurprisingly, as most women composer. But I also, as a woman of a certain age, I've been increasingly been aware of the level of sexism accepted. I guess it comes with age. All of that excited me a lot, and I was fortunate enough to get the job, which we talked a little bit about open call before. I'm going to repeat a little bit about open call. For me, I apply to all the open call I see out of principle because I am so happy to see them because they are so rare. So I just feel like this is such a need to break through the nepotism of decreasingly funded art world. So, and of course, the less money, the more nepotism will happen. So I think it's a major move. And it has enormous importance. And I feel like really the Arts Council and any funders should sponsor and financially sustain the difficulty of going through all those applications, because what are we doing otherwise? Around the idea of the cantata. So there was those three different pieces that Toya somehow decided to juxtapose, and the order wasn't decided, but it did feel like I think we had several meetings where we decided of the order, and it felt like, of course, we needed a sort of unifying landscape, and also there was this great imperative and challenge, which was to be totally accessible. So not only audio description, but also what have I said? Not subtitle. What am I saying?
Yeah, we did captioning. We did captioning
yes,
built into the design, as well
That's
as the audio description. In the audio description,
just happened
I wrote in the week of the rehearsals because it was delivered live, and I had to describe stuff that Mathilde was deciding on in the very short rehearsal process. So that was a very compact process for everybody, but really exciting. When you were talking about devising an opera, I was like, oh yeah, that bit really did feel.
Yeah, because we had 1 week. We had 1 week to actually put that together. And so I had prepped a lot of the design, actual access. Like the access was embodied in the design before, and I had drawn a lot of the scene, and I had discussion with the three singers and talking to them, because in a way we had to kind of pre-design and pre-make quite a lot, because we had 1 week to organize everything and to make it work, really. And I got quite obsessed with watermelon, so I'm going to get to that. So I got quite obsessed about watermelon because, of course, there are biblical stories. So it's all about women being good, which that hasn't changed much. But being good and being also this source of hope, and being this fertile uterus, and also being completely oppressed and exchanged as goods. And we are in that arid land of Israel where miracle happens, I guess. So I kept on thinking of the land and food growing, and what is miraculously grown in Israel. And of course, what miraculously grow on sand in North Africa and in Israel is watermelon. It just grows, and it becomes this enormous belly / breast full of amazing red flesh slash blood slash sex. So all of it about the watermelon felt exactly about the desire of man, but at the same time the aridity of the land, and also the beauty of it, and the devouring of it. So all of it felt really right. And
can I ask you something about this,
yeah.
Matilda? Can I ask you, thinking about back to the open call discussion, but also to what you're saying,
Yeah.
which is, as a director, what you're often asked to do to get a job is to kind of pitch a concept, but you didn't have to do that. This came after. This came
Yes.
after we'd talked for weeks, and you'd got to work time with the designer, and you'd got to look at plans for the different venues we were talking to, and I just wonder if you feel like, how you feel about what you were asked to do at different stages, because did it's very hard to imagine feeling like you're devising something if you have to essentially present a product in a job interview.
Yeah, so I didn't present that at all. I mean, the interview was not that at all. The interview was about me and how I work and what I'm interested in. So in that sense, the open call didn't require an enormous amount of preparation from me. So, if I hadn't had it, I wouldn't have felt like I've been exploited. That's all. So then the whole watermelon and design process came in the following weeks once I had the job, and then I worked with the designer, and there was a whole process of me planting the ideas with the designer, and also in the conversation with the singers, because it's quite hard, just you can't really do anything in the vacuum like that. So I had to spend a bit of time with them on Zoom. None of it felt I mean, I'm quite happy. I was quite happy to pre-work like that. That didn't feel like anything different as a sort of normal prep as a director. I mean, the only really hard thing was the very, very limited time we had. I think that was and also I have to say that I had underestimated the amount of liquid watermelons hold. So that became a whole malarkey, because of course we have all those very expensive instruments. I'm sure Katarzyna is going to talk about that on stage. And of course we have a baseball bat, and we are bashing watermelons because of, in some one of those stories, of course, there's Judith decapitating the head of Holofernes, and it didn't decapitating the head didn't feel like, the level of violence we wanted, and I guess the whole contemporary vocabulary around it felt I don't know why, but it felt instinctively better to bash his head than decapitating him. It's a really weird thing. I mean, I don't do that normally, just for you to know. but the decapitation felt a little bit like a symbol that echoed other things, whenever bashing felt like pure rage. And so the idea of having this watermelon that is a baby, that is breast, that represents fecundity, and that somehow she puts Holofernes to bed because he's so drunk, and then bashes him. It also felt very much like bashing your own children, because of the way we don't deal with feminism somehow as women, because of course we participate actively in a sexism that is perpetuated. So it really felt like a sort of mutilation of oneself and of the future being to carry on being like that. So on that front, symbolically, the violence was much more pertinent, I think, than the decapitation, which talks about another level of where we taps into French Revolution, Daesh, and all of that, which is very different. And
okay, I don't want to cut you off at a point where you're like full of like bashing children, because I feel like that might like leave like it might not be the right moment to like freeze in people's minds. But I'm just going to answer the question in the chat that yes, this is the same story of Judith and Holofernes is in the Gentileschi painting, which is, in fact, she painted it 3 times, and she also painted Susanna and the Elders twice. That was one of the other stories in it. So it's obviously stories that resonate with female artists. I'm aware that I would really like to talk to Katarzyna. Hello, Katarzyna. Um, could you tell us a little bit about the process of coming into the project through the open call? What made you want to apply for it? What was how you were expecting and what was not how you were expecting?
All right. So, hello everyone. I'm Katarzyna, and I am Polish, British, white woman in early 40s, and I have dark long hair, and I'm wearing black cat-shaped glasses and a blue jumper with a flowery neckline. And I was a harpsichordist for Out of Her Mouth, amazing project. So what drew me to it, I remember when it was announced, it seemed like just perfect project for me, really. So everything from the project description was calling me to apply because I'm into female composers and I love French style, French Baroque music. And I was familiar with Jacquette Laguerre's music already because I did the project as a student with her music. So I had this idea and insight into her style. So it felt very natural to approach this call. And also it was advertised happening in Scotland. So what not to like about it? It was just perfect in every aspect. But then I think the expectations really went even beyond because it turned out to be quite an extraordinary production, thanks to Mathilde, extraordinary ideas, and it definitely changed my relationship with the watermelons for good. Because obviously we had this challenge of protecting brand new harpsichord, which Dunedin Jazz got from Angie Wooderson, and other precious instruments, the theorbo and violin and the cello. So that was a brilliant idea to bring on the curtain, which would protect the instruments from the watermelon juice from the watermelons being bashed with a baseball bat. In a shortcut. But then the challenge obviously also arose when the bat actually carried the juice over the curtain. So all these things were quite extraordinary.
Can I just ask, had you been because the musicians were very on stage and very much a part of the staged performance, and whether that was something new for you and whether that was kind of appealing or frightening or
Absolutely. I mean, it was not really known at the beginning, right? It was not really specified in open call that it will be like this. So I haven't expected that. And that was actually also a great experience to be part of the performance, all the musicians on stage. And also, I quite enjoyed being challenged in a way, like in a physical sense, because musicians are used to just sitting there and playing and just focusing on the music. But actually, Mathilde required us to be, physically more involved in the show. And I really didn't mind Caroline Sampson playing with my hair and things like that. And also, what I loved about this that the show evolved in a way, right? Because we were very lucky to have 5 shows, and each of them was really like evolving, and it was much different. And that was also great what Mathilde make us to do, that we've got 5-star review in the Times, and what one could have thought, okay, let's just do the same and it'll be great. But no, Mathilde actually thought, yeah, let's improve it, let's make it even better, a bit different. And remember, for the last 2 shows, I've been challenged to actually stand up and look at the table and the mess, and then go back to the harpsichord straight into the chords, and Anna then is singing Now Run, which was actually brilliant because my energy contributed to this running energy in a way. So that was ingenious. And I think that this sort of skills, we don't have many opportunities to practice this sort of performance skills as musicians. And I find it really interesting and inspiring. So thanks for that lesson, Mathilde.
Thank you very much, both of you. I obviously would love to chat to you more, and hopefully we will. But in terms of this evening's event, I'd like now to just open it up to any kind of questions or comments from everybody in the room about the things we've been talking about. I know there's a couple of things I'd like to get to in the chat, but perhaps if like we said at the beginning, you can literally raise a hand, or there is a raise the hand button on Zoom if anybody would like to chip in.
I'm really interested by Ailey's question in the chat about budgeting for access needs when you don't necessarily know who'll be involved in the project. I think for any composer sort of leading their own project or any kind of company starting that up, Ailey, also highly, raises a really good point about the flexibility of a budget once it's been submitted. Yeah, I don't know, Bridget or Mark, if you could speak to that.
Sure, I was just typing a response actually, but very happy to to tell everyone. It is a really good question because obviously you don't know exactly what people's needs are going to be if you don't know who you're working with yet, and you don't know how much the provisions that they might need are going to cost. But I think over time we've kind of learned to make a bit of an estimate of what different access provisions might cost. And in fact, that is a line. And I've certainly put that in Arts Council applications, Arts Council England and other funders where I'll explain, and I might put a line for £1,000 and just say budget for access needs, artists still TBC. And that's, no one's questioned that. And sometimes you might not spend all of it, and sometimes you might need a little bit more. But as we all know, as people who are producers in the room, you that's how budgets go, and you juggle as necessary. But I think funders increasingly expect to see that kind of provision, and it's certainly not been questioned in any of the applications I've put in.
I've recently fundraised not just for hero work but for a different company, and we put in an access contingency into a composer open call, and again that was for like trust and foundations funders, but again we only had like positive response to that, and it wasn't queried separately from like the contingency. So like
Dominic has his hand up.
Hi, Dominic.
Oh, hello. Yes, I mean, I just wanted to say how refreshing it is that you're even thinking about this, because it's, as a number of people said in the chat, it's so soul destroying, putting in a bid, I'm a composer, but, as an artist or whatever. And it just feels like a sort of an exam where you send something in and it gets marked and it's a 99 out of 100 rejection. But I have to say, I'm just the open call you've just done recently. It did actually feel different, and thank you for that.
Sarah and then Teresa. Sarah, hello.
Hi. Yeah, it's just going back to that open call. I'm also a composer, and what you were saying earlier is like about whether you value the process in actually doing these things, and I think there is a real value, and something that Dominic said in the chat actually that I really agree with, that the ones that are really, really difficult, because there's some that are really popular and lots of people apply, but the ones that you're actually sort of required to put in quite a lot of days of creative work to create the music, and then you don't get them. And there was something very like accessible, which is a word that has been said a lot tonight, but about your call, because it didn't require a huge amount, and we've all done huge amounts of work, so to be able to share what we have at that stage of an open call is really good. And then another thing about what I find valuable in applying for anything in terms of the open calls is often you discover a new company and discover what works and creative people within that company. So even when you don't get the job, often that can lead to new relationships and exploring new work. And this has been a really interesting journey for me to actually discover Mahogany Opera, which was not sorry, but you weren't on my radar before, but you very much are now. And I'm just been really impressed with the catalogue of work and the diversity of everything. So I would just say, yeah, well done, and keep there should be more companies making this, taking these steps. I know there's Open Hire, and which is another one that's a good place to sort of find these calls. I don't know whether you actually put your open call onto Open Hire, but that's something that's on my radar. I can't remember.
They did for me. They did because that's where I found it.
That's where you found it. Yeah. Okay. So yeah, yeah, it's been very positive to hear how you carefully think through the wording and everything. It kind of makes sense into terms of how accessible this has been to do that. Anyway, I'm going to stop. I'm wittering on now. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. I'm going to go to Teresa because you had a hand up before, if you'd still like to speak.
Hi, and yeah, I agree totally with what Sarah said as well, that it does make a difference not having to do a vast pitch for a project that you don't ever get. I think that is really soul destroying. I was just going to also say that I mean, this was really enjoyable, and this whole process and listening and meeting you all was great, and seeing the video of the work. But there was another way I had done an open call, which was, in fact, we all went to a workshop first, which was nothing to do really with the project. I mean, we did, in a way, it was kind of telling us a bit about what the project would be, but we ended up having to sort of really thrust ourselves forward and do loads of different stuff. And then we applied. But and although that was quite a long process, it was still also, we got a lot out of doing that workshop together. And I met someone there that I ended up working with. And even though I did get that job, I didn't get it with her. I got it with somebody else, but I've worked with her subsequently. So that's also quite an interesting way round. I don't know whether that would work so well with, it might work with singers, but it certainly worked with composers and librettists, and it was a really good way of throwing us together, kind of letting us know about the group and what everyone wanted from us, and then we applied. And I actually applied with 4 different composers for that job, and I got one of those composers. But it was a really amazing experience. And somebody also said to me recently, the Arts Council aren't requested to do put funds into workshops for opera very much. And I thought, oh, that's really interesting, because I'm sure that opera would gain a great deal from going through workshop processes. And I've worked more in musical theatre than in opera, and obviously in musical theatre we do tons of workshops. And I think the workshop process is a really exciting process, and where you really get to know people as well. Anyway, sorry.
No, don't apologise. It's useful to think about other ways that open calls could work, and it reminded me a little bit of what Freddie was saying about how the ensemble came together, but in an even more kind of expanded form of a kind of pre-application process. If anybody is burning to speak, now would be the moment. If not, it's Bill. Hello, Bill.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I had a conversation today which was nothing to do with the company I run, Tete a Tete, which was another organisation I'm involved in. I'd love to know what the room thinks about what happens if you make an open call, you don't get the results you want in terms of inclusion and diversity, and so you edit the results. Is that okay?
What do you mean by edit the results, Bill? You mean in terms of who gets the work, or?
Yes. So say everybody who applies is an old Etonian man in their 60s. Is it okay to bring in younger people, ethnically diverse people, disabled people, in order to unskew that outcome?
You mean as a sort of separate phase? You do the open call has happened, and then you have to sort of supplement the pool of people that you have. I'm going to I'm going to cowardly throw it to Freddie and see what he says.
I think you should have a good look at yourself And I just, no, sorry, I wasn't talking about to you, Tori. I was talking about the person who's done this open call. Sorry. I think if you've got that far down the line, you've got into that situation, then how have you done an open call in the first place? Do you know what I mean? Like, how have you got there in the first place? I think some self-reflection earlier down the line might have needed to have taken place. That's slightly not really answering the question, is it? But
surely it depends a bit if you mean supplement the team, as in you are hiring at least one person from the people who applied to the open call, or are you saying, actually, I don't want any of those people, I'm just going to pick people that I know? Because I think that's quite different from a sort of ethical standpoint. But I also think that if it was literally all white old Etonians, I wouldn't have a huge ethical problem with rejecting all of them. Speaking in a personal capacity, not on behalf of the company right
That's
now.
not how I feel.
I think some of this comes back to what we were discussing before as well, around actually how the opportunity is shared. And it's, making sure that you are looking at, what are those networks that you're utilizing? Who are the people that are getting that open call out there for you to make sure that it's reaching the right people that you want to apply? I think if you don't put any effort into that side of things, then you do run that risk of getting one set of demographics sort of responding to that open call.
I guess the wording as well, and the way it's been shared on which platform, and if it requires an enormous knowledge that only certain people of a certain class can have, you know what I mean? There's that as well.
I guess also I wonder, is there a sort of middle point between that sort of open call and the end product? Like I know with the Sky in a Small Cage call, there was an extra statement sort of released saying we're actually looking for more low voices, which I thought I'd not seen on a call before, again, because I'd not really looked at different calls before. But is there like a process whilst the call is still open, if you're not getting the applications that you're looking for, are there things that as an organization you might look to do?
Yeah, I think so. And I think you can be explicit about who you're, and if it is that you're looking for more low voices, you can say you're looking for more low voices. But I think also if it's that you've realized that you're not attracting disabled applicants, you can, say so. That's okay. And, just say so in places where, in a nice way where disabled people will see you, like rather than somewhere where they won't, and equivalents for other groups that you might want to reach.
Tori, I'm conscious of time.
Yes, we are meant to be wrapping up. So I'm if there's nobody else that really needs to add to that, I'm going to first of all very much thank Ty and Rylan and Matilda and Katarzyna for joining us and giving us their perspective on their experiences, and the fact that those seem to have been broadly pretty great experiences with Mahogany. So I'm going to thank Freddie and Bridget and Mark for that, and for everything that I've experienced with them, and as myself and as Hera. And then I'd like to thank everybody else that's here for coming and for listening, for joining in the conversation, for being interested in how we get people together to make stuff, because that's important. Yeah, and then I'll let Freddie say goodbye, and then maybe we're all off to have some dinner.
I'm definitely off to have some dinner. I'm hungry. Yeah, just to echo everything that Tori just said, thank you to everybody. And I suppose just the only thing I want to say in terms of this idea that, oh God, there are so many people applying and there's so few opportunities. But it's so important, especially now, that we keep working and we keep shouting about what we do and showing how important it is and how essential it is that what we're doing. So so don't give up, and we're all together in this. And so yeah, good luck with everything that we're all doing.